Hello, everyone. I'm Lana. Thank you so much for joining me. President Biden is trying to ease concerns about the nation's economic recovery after a report released by the Department of Labor Friday found only 266,000 U.S. jobs were added in April. That's far below what some economists predicted and what the Biden administration had hoped for. Speaking at the White House Friday, the president said the economy was moving in the right direction. He said 1.5 million new jobs have been created since he took office, but he did admit there was still a long road ahead. Mr. Biden also responded to criticism from Republicans who argue that expanded unemployment benefits are causing some people to stay home instead of find work. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang has the latest.
President Biden tried to frame the disappointing jobs report as just another step towards economic recovery, but he acknowledged the difficult task ahead.
And we knew this wouldn't be a sprint, it'd be a marathon. Our efforts are starting to work, but the climb is steep, and we still have a long way to go.
Employers added just 266,000 jobs in April, sharply lower than the 1 million that many economists had predicted, and the lowest monthly figure since the president took office. Mr. Biden argued that money from the COVID relief package passed in March will help once it works its way through the economy. But he admitted that doesn't help people who are hurting right now.
While jobs are coming back, there's still millions of people out there looking for work.
But some employers, like at this Boston area pizza shop, are struggling to find those people.
I never thought we'd be as short-handed as we are right now.
Manufacturing and construction companies, along with businesses in the service industry, say they are dealing with a labor shortage.
We definitely have the clientele. We definitely have the business. Now it's just the part trying to get people to come in to work.
Republicans claim that additional unemployment benefits are to blame. $300 a week in federal aid on top of state payments that average $320 a week.
They're better off financially to stay home rather than go back to work.
The Chamber of Commerce today called for an end to those benefits, and the GOP governors of South Carolina and Montana have announced its residents would be cut off from those funds next month, arguing they're harming the economy. The president was asked if the benefits were discouraging people from looking for work.
No, nothing measurable.
And Weijia joins me now. Weijia, how is the Biden administration responding to the slower than expected economic recovery?
Well, even the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said that she was surprised by the number and had anticipated that it would be bigger. But she said that they always knew that the road to recovery would be a bumpy one. So they're saying it's not exactly a surprise and not even viewing it as a setback. But President Biden says it does show that there's a lot more work to do. But he says it's important to have perspective and to note that on average, under his administration, hundreds of thousands of jobs have been added every month instead of, the reverse, which would be losing more jobs. So at least that is a positive sign, he says. But, Republicans were very quick to pounce and blamed Biden administration policies as being an incentive not to work.
As you've reported, some Republicans, including Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, are talking about exactly that, blaming the amount of unemployment benefits for the disappointing job numbers. How is the White House responding to that criticism?
So administration officials are echoing exactly what we are hearing from many economists who say there are several factors in play here, including the COVID fear factor, that some people are still nervous about going into a workspace, especially if it's a crowded restaurant or a bar where we are seeing a shortage of labor. They also say parents are struggling to find childcare, and so they can't just pick up and go right back to work, especially since some businesses are reopening faster than schools. However, others say that the unemployment benefits could be a factor, but certainly not the driving one that's keeping people at home.
President Biden is set to meet with Republican lawmakers next week to discuss his jobs and families plans. Could this most recent jobs report have any impact on those conversations, Weijia?
Well, it could give President Biden and the White House more support for the case that they continue to make, that we need to make this investment for the future, because there's still a lot of work to do. Because before this jobs report came out, we heard from several Republicans who said that the economy and the state of jobs was already falling back into place on their own, and that, you know, a package of this size and scope was not necessary. But now, you know, they can indicate that the growth was not as fast as they had anticipated. But I think I don't know that it will change the core of the argument, because what's really you know, holding everyone up is the cost and the price tag. And I think that they're going to have to meet somewhere in the middle, because as of right now, the counter offer that the Republicans have offered is just about $600 billion, which is very different from the combined $4 trillion that the president is hoping to pass.
Switching topics, Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas visited the U.S.-Mexico border on Friday. He and Democratic lawmakers toured a Customs and Border Protection facility in Lana, Texas. Where do things currently stand with the administration's attempts to address the crisis at the southern border?
Well, when people criticized the administration for having a crisis at the border, they were specifically talking about the amount of time that young migrants, those unaccompanied children, were having to spend inside facilities that were controlled by Customs and Border Patrol. And now that is a very different scenario. Now these children are being processed very quickly into new facilities that are operated by Health and Human Services that are a lot more humane than those other ones. But the root problem remains, and that is that there are still hundreds of these young migrants coming to the U.S. every day. And so the vice president is working on, you know, trying to get to those root causes through diplomatic efforts and talks. And they will continue to try to send the message not only to the children but to others that this is not, you know, a time to come here. Of course, in the case of refugees, it's very different, and they have made clear that in the case of children who need protection, they do not have a cap, and they are not going to turn those young people away, unlike in the previous administration. And so I think we're just going to have to keep an eye on it, but certainly there is a huge difference with regard to how much time it's taking to process those young people. It's a lot quicker.
Yeah, definitely seeing that. All right, Weijia, thank you.
Sure.